let's keep going. So while there are tons of sewing tools lists out there, I can guarantee that my 10 tools are the ones that you need to have because I travel all the time. I'm in a new apartment, a new city, usually every 3 months, and I sew clothes as I travel. So I know these 10 tools are going to help you and be everything you need to start sewing, okay? So let's look at it. I kind of showed you already. I keep switching tabs. I'm so sorry, you guys. I'll get this figured out eventually. Okay, so the first two that we talked about yesterday were straight pens and shears. And if you haven't watched the video on that, check the description. I'll have a link to the playlist so you can go back and watch the older videos. Okay, today we're going to talk about seam ripper and something to mark with. I know that that's just a tad vague, but it's going to make more sense when I explain it. So the first thing is a seam ripper. Have you seen one of these before? It's this little guy. And what this is this is kind of like the eraser of the sewing world. So it has this nice little cap on it. You can see I cracked mine. That happens when you travel and your suitcase gets squished. But take it out, flip it, and now it's a handle. This is long now. So what this does is this helps you take out the stitches if you've sewn something incorrectly. Okay, so have you seen these before? Do you have one in your toolkit? Let me know in the comments. And the trick with these is, how do you actually use them? Okay, actually, before we get into that, when you buy one of these, things to look for. You want to make sure that it is a bright color. I know mine is not, because I travel all the time. I usually stay pretty clean, but when I had a sewing room, I would lose this all the time. It gets stuck under fabric, it falls on the floor, it will disappear. And if you can't find this, then you can't take your stitches out and you can't continue sewing. Like if you sew something and it gets messed up a little bit and you need to fix it with this and you can't find it, it is so annoying. You always want to know where this is. So I highly recommend getting one in a bright color. They make them in a lime green, and I think that would make life much easier. You also want it to be comfortable, because seam ripping, it kind of takes a while to do this depending on how much you sewed incorrectly. So make sure it's comfortable to use, and yeah, that's really all you need. Make sure you know where it is and make sure it's comfortable to hold. Okay, so then the next question, once you know what you're looking for and you have one, is how do you use it? And there are actually several different ways, but I'm going to quickly show you my favorite options just to kind of get you started. Okay, so here's our fabric from yesterday. I've just thrown a line of stitches on here. And the first way that people tend to want to do this is to pull your fabric apart and stick your seam ripper here and kind of like push along this. That is so bad because what's actually happening is right down here in this little V notch is a very sharp blade, and that's what's going to cut your threads. Now, if you push this in here and you just kind of push down and along this stitch line, you can very easily cut your fabric, okay? And you don't want that. You're putting holes in your fabric. That's a terrible time. So one option you have is to just stay on the outside and poke the end of your needle threader through each little stitch and pull it out. Now, these stitches are very big, so that makes this really easy. The smaller your stitches are, this could be much more difficult. But that's one really easy way to do this, is again, just stick your needle under it and pull it out. Okay? Now, if that's really tricky and you can't quite get it to work, my next favorite thing to do is to pull this open. And as you pull this gently, you'll see that you pull out your threads. They get really wide right here. So then what you can do is take your seam ripper and pull this out, and then tug some more and pull this out. Again, these are very loose stitches, so this is extra easy. The smaller the stitches are, the trickier this becomes. But this is pretty much the two ways that I use my seam ripper, and that way I make sure I never cut my fabric with my seam ripper. I've seen people do this. Again, this method of like lining it up and just shoving it through. And I actually used to do this a lot until I ripped a bunch of holes in my fabric and didn't know how to fix that, and it wasn't very fun. So those are my two favorite ways to use the seam ripper. Do you have a favorite way? Maybe you've already been sewing and you've already been using this, and you have a different way of using the seam ripper. Let me know in the comments, because you guys, I told you in the first video, and I'll tell you again, there is no one right way to sew anything or to even seam rip something. There are a million ways to do it, and whichever way works for you is the right way. Okay? So if you have a different way, let me know in the comments. I'm always excited to try new ways and new methods and learn new things. Okay? So this was the seam ripper. Is it making sense so far? Do you feel good about this item on your toolkit list? Okay, so the next thing on our list is something to mark with. Now, the reason I leave that really vague and I don't put tailor's chalk or washable markers or anything specific is because for each type of fabric, hold on, I got another message. I don't know why today the live is being so weird. Okay. My train of thought. Something to mark with. Because what you'd want to mark with is different depending on the fabric you're marking. Okay? So I usually keep 3 to 4 different marking utensils in my toolkit at all times, because different fabrics need different tools. Okay, so some of the most popular items for marking are tailor's chalk. They're those triangular pieces of white chalk. I don't keep them with me because they break in my suitcase all the time. But it's just like sidewalk chalk, except thinner, so that way your lines aren't like an inch fat. But it's just like that. So when you draw with it, it's powdery, and if you rub on it, you can kind of make it disappear. And if you wash your fabric, it will 100% disappear. So chalk is really nice because it's temporary. It's not going to permanently mark your fabric, but it's super temporary. Again, if you just kind of wipe across it, it will disappear. So it depends on how much you're planning on moving your fabric. Okay, I found chalk to be very difficult. It's not one of my favorites. Something that I actually really love that's very easy is just a regular pencil. Especially if you're just starting out and you're just tracing the outlines of pieces, pencils work really well. They're very light. You don't really see them. So even though they are permanently on your fabric, it never messed with any of my projects. Everything looked fine. And you're like guaranteed to already have one of these. So if I were you, the first tool I would use is just this one. Now, that being said, if you're working with any kind of stretch fabric, a pencil will not work, because when you're trying to draw something with a pencil, you kind of have to press down, right? You need pressure. If you press down on a knit or a stretchy fabric and you try to draw something, you'll actually stretch the fabric and you won't be able to draw a nice straight line, or else it's really, really hard. I've tried, I would not recommend it. So a better option for that is something like a pen or a marker, something that has ink that just kind of goes into the fabric versus you having to press down to make the mark. Okay, washable markers, like Crayola ones for kids at school, amazing. They're really, really nice, cheap. You probably already have them at home, so I would recommend those. If you want something just a little bit nicer, you could get what's called a Frixion pen, and it's just a, let's see, it's these. You can get them at any office supply store. They say Frixion, and the way that these work is this little tip on the end is rubber, and you use it just like an eraser. So this looks like an erasable pen. So you'll write with this end, you'll erase with this end, and when you erase, what happens is you're rubbing on the paper, right? And it heats up, it gets warmer. And as it gets warmer, the ink actually turns invisible. Now, if you just want an erasable pen, Frixions are great. But for sewing, they're extra super nice because if you just take your iron and like put it on top of the markings that you made with your pen, they will disappear. Or if you wash them and you have them in the dryer, the heat from the dryer will also turn all of your marks invisible. Isn't that super neat? It's kind of like magic. I just found out about Frixions a couple years ago. They got really popular in the sewing industry. And yeah, they're a very nice alternative, but they're a little bit more expensive. And I find washable markers work just as well. So on our list, we have seam ripper and something to mark with. Seam ripper we talked about. And as far as something to mark with, my first two suggestions, if you're just getting started, would be a pencil, just a regular old pencil, and some Crayola washable markers. Okay? Now, again, if you've already been sewing, let me know in the comments what your favorite tool to mark with is, because there are literally hundreds of things you could mark with. Like I just got this really fancy invisible ink pen that's very similar to the Frixion, but a little bit more like a marker than a pen. So like it's this very inky, like you put it down, it just like starts putting ink out. I'll do a video on it. That description didn't make a lot of sense. But there are so many things you can use to mark with. Test things, try things, find the ones that work for you, okay? So, how are you feeling now that you know what the first 4 tools that you need to have to start sewing? Are you excited? Do you have all 4 in your toolkit already? Let me know in the comments. And if you would like to know what all 10 tools are, well, I guess you kind of already saw them. I have them over here. But if you would like this printable checklist along with my 5 steps to sewing confidence, which are the 5 steps you need to start sewing, which includes using your sewing machine, unboxing it, threading it, setting the tension, getting your tools together, all those beginner steps you need to take before you sew your first project, then head to the link in the description. I will send you the 5 steps directly to your inbox. Yep, it's that easy. Okay, and as a little teaser, if you've been dreaming of sewing your own clothes and you want to get started ASAP, then make sure you stay tuned next week. I am starting a very fun project and it involves helping a bunch of people start sewing their own clothes in just 30 days. I don't know about you, but it took me months and months and months to start sewing my own clothes. And even once I started sewing them, I wasn't wearing them out in public. I was just kind of trying and seeing what happened. But what I'm going to be working on next week is a way to help people start sewing their first outfit, their first piece of me-made clothing in just 30 days and be able to wear it outside, out in public, with confidence. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, stay tuned. It's all coming up. And I will see you tomorrow when we talk about the next two tools, the fabric and thread, how to pick them, what you want to look for, and what best options you have for beginners. Okay? So loved seeing you here today, and I will see you guys tomorrow.